Aloha. I am going to share something a little different today. It was what came through in my channeling session. I'm going to share it in two parts because one of them is what I believe is a past life regression of mine, and I just thought you might be interested in the story. And then the next video, I'm going to talk about something I was called to talk about in my meditation, which is a little different and actually a little more sciencey. So what happened this morning is I set the intention of learning more about the catastrophic flood that apparently took down Mu. I'm not kidding. When I channeled Tabitha, the day I did my first video, I didn't, I have kind of heard about like Atlantis, of course, Lemuria more recently, and Mu, but I thought Lemuria and Mu were the same thing. So when I said I was channeling Tabitha from Lemuria, that's not actually where I was. And as soon as I'll post the link to the YouTube video where I was trying to learn about these ancient civilizations. We don't even know that they ever were, right? But Mu is in the Pacific. Lemuria was actually named by a scientist who was studying like island biogeography and looking at the distribution globally of those really cute animals called lemurs, and like the patterns didn't match, and that led him to infer that there was actually a landmass in between India and Africa, and he called it Lemuria after the lemurs. Isn't that cute? So Mu is different, and it's in the Pacific, and it basically lies atop, but in a much larger way. If you believe what people say about it, then it's like a giant continental landmass that spanned like the Pacific Islands. And so I went in asking specifically to understand, why did this great flood happen? Like there's this great flood, and it's even in the Old Testament, but there's a lot of just ancient lore. Like almost every civilization talks about there being an ancient, like a great flood. Not like a small flood, not like a coastal hurricane storm surge, like a catastrophic cataclysmic flood. And I asked like, why? And so I was first brought to this lifetime where I think I was alive at the time of the flood, and I missed it. But I was from Mu, but I was a hunter, and I was in Alaska actually hunting, because the first thing that came into me was like, well, it's a male energy, and then I saw a bear and a seal. And then I could just tell like that I was a hunter, like an indigenous Alaskan, or, I basically got stuck there in Alaska at the time of the Great Flood. And then I married a local woman. My marriage was really unhappy. So I was never happy at home. I always was out hunting, and that worked because that was, what I did. And then we had a son, and I just loved him more than life itself. I always ask like, okay, well, how many events do I need to know about? This was 4. The first thing was getting stuck after the flood. The second thing was more like being unhappy in home life, but having this child who I loved like more than life itself, like with my whole heart and soul. And then the third event was taking him hunting, and his first hunt when he was like 12 or 13. And just the feeling of like, I was so proud of him. He took his first caribou, and it was just like, I was so proud of him for doing that. And he was really proud to bring home the meat to his mom. And then it flashed to, basically my death, and that I knew I was getting old for the time, and I was probably not even 40, or maybe I was 40, I don't know, but old, and I was sick. And in the culture at that time, we basically walked away. Like we knew we were gonna die, and we like said our goodbyes, and we started walking north in the mountains with the intention of freezing to death. So the last thing it was showing me wasn't my death per se, but it was the act of having to say goodbye to my son, who I just loved so much. And I had an indescribable sadness having to leave him behind. That was kind of cool, leaving the wife behind. I didn't care for her much by that point. But anyway, that was the lifetime, and it tied into the whole flood issue, because I think that was probably my lifetime during the flood. So I experienced it as a sense of just like great loss. Like everything was just gone. And I had to start a whole new different life. And maybe I will just tie this together, or maybe I'll cut it into two later. So that led me to think back, like, why the flood? And sometimes meditations I can really go into these more like past life regression trance states, which tend to give me a lot of insights about who I am as a human and as a soul. But sometimes your mind is just more busy, and I'm a scientist. I have a busy mind. But I feel like I'm called to share this message is when I came to why the flood. I got called to pull some science research, and I always use a company called illicit.com. They do a great job with research science. A lot of the AI models for research will do things like hallucinate, and Illicit has solved that problem by tying the research to scientific papers. And so I did a query on illicit.com because I worked my last 7 years of my career were as a landscape ecologist, GIS mapping person in the Pacific Islands. So I lived in Hawaii, and we worked with all these low-lying island areas where we're doing projects with the Fish and Wildlife Service, translocating birds, because with the current, even the very conservative sea level rise predictions for these places, they're just going to be gone. And already we've had instances where with big storms, some of these sand atolls, which are really important habitat for some of our marine mammals and turtles as haulouts and all that stuff, gone, just gone. I mean, look into it. You may or may not know about this. But there are other projections that I heard about in the course of my job, which were predicted much, much higher sea level rise. And that kind of comes from the what if the Antarctic ice cap actually detaches from the ground and falls into the ocean and melts. So this was all what was coming to mind when I was why? Why the flooding in Lemuria? And it just, I'm compelled to share this with you, and I'll put the link below, but I think it was 9 to 12 meters is the high level projection of what that would look like of sea level rise. Think about that. 3 feet to a meter, 10 meters, 30 feet. Sea level was, and it's not linear either. It doesn't just go up like a bathtub. You have to deal with things like tidal surges and storm surges on top of that. And I guess what I feel called to do, I'm not trying to scare you. I'm not saying this is not a political thing, but what we're about to do as a society is build a ton of data centers for AI. AI is amazing, but it consumes a ton of power to run it. So we're in the process right now of building data centers all over the world, which this will be great when we have furthered our development of fusion-based nuclear power. But right now we're powering with fossil fuels. So if anything, in the face of climate change, our global civilization has chosen to lay our foot on the gas. It's kind of let's go here. And so I guess, okay, that's where we live in. But I guess what I wanted to just encourage you to do, not saying this is going to happen. I have no idea. I'm not channeling some dystopian future. But I think about it. Where do you live? What would happen if the sea level actually rose by 30 feet in your neighborhood? What would happen to your home? Where do you live? What assets might you want to sell? What assets might you want to buy? And that's all. That's all I'm saying. That's what I got called to share this morning. A little weird. I know. The whole experience. It's very weird to me. So if you like being dragged through my weird experiences, you can like, share, or subscribe this video. And if not, go find somebody else on YouTube to enjoy. There's so much out there because we are all beautiful and creative people, and we all have our own message to share. Thank you for listening.